let me welcome everyone to today's webinar. Now that I'm off mute, this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts here at BrainCell. I joined the company, I'd say about 2.5 years ago, and we were right in the process of making that shift from making business decisions based on instinct and gut to really making our sales and our growth decisions based on data. And even if you're a company that recognizes the value in making decisions based on data, it's not an easy shift to make, right? There's still challenges. So I'm really excited. We're going to take you through the 6 steps to becoming a data-driven company. But before we do that, let me walk through some housekeeping items. And Tony, if you could move the slides forward for me. Thank you. So this is going to be a 45-minute presentation with a 15-minute Q&A at the end. So at any time during the presentation, if you have questions, just put them right into the question box and we will address them during the audience Q&A. We're also recording this webinar, so we will send you both the recording of the webinar and the slide deck. You'll likely see it in your email inbox tomorrow morning. And with that, let's jump into today's presenters. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Tony Berry. Tony Berry is one of our senior solutions architects. He has, is it over 3 decades now, Tony?
It's a few.
In the consulting,
yeah, I think that's right.
I think the last time we were on a webinar, I said 2 decades, and he said add 10 more years. So I'm adding 10 more years. But Tony's really focused. He's a business analyst and technology consultant with expertise in developing solution roadmaps and implementing strategic programs to help enable business growth within companies of all sizes. Also on the line today, we have Jordan Berry. Jordan Berry is a business analyst and developer with BrainCell, and he has a passion, he tells me, for creating intuitive, usable software solutions that address complex business challenges. So thank you both for joining us today.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
And before I turn it over to you, Tony, I thought we'd ask the audience a couple of poll questions to kind of gauge where they're at in terms of how they're utilizing data, their accessibility to data. So let's start with the first poll question. And that's, how well does your company today use data to make key business decisions? And so we have very well, all your decisions are based on data, which is awesome, good, but it's taking you, maybe it's a struggle to really get the data and to review the data. Maybe sometimes, you have the data, but you're not really leveraging it to make decisions. Or at this stage, you may be how we were, a few years ago, where you're still relying mainly on your gut instinct. So it looks like I'm going to just give people a couple more seconds to respond. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the majority, 63% are replying good, but it's taking a long time to collect and review the data. And then we have about 26% saying that sometimes they're making business decisions based on that data. So is that in line with what you're typically seeing, Tony and Jordan, with other companies that you're working with?
Yeah, sure is, and I think it also shows that it's a never-ending journey. So it's good to see that everybody kind of aligns with what we're seeing. So you're on the right webinar.
Great. And then the second poll question, which is related to the first one, is how easy is it to get the data that you need to make these business decisions? So is it really easy? You're getting it in real time. It's basically instantaneous. Maybe it's somewhat easy. You have access to it, but it requires pulling it from multiple systems or looking in a bunch of different solutions. It's challenging, it takes a long time, or it's just purely impossible. And it looks like we're 71% are responding that it's challenging to get the data they need to make decisions. 33% are saying it's somewhat easy.
Okay, well, good. No, nobody's saying impossible, so that's good, right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Tony, to take it
Okay,
away.
great. Well, we look forward to it. So certainly that does align with what we're seeing and what some of the analysts are seeing in the space. But that's what we're going to talk about today is really the 6 steps to become data driven. The agenda we've got together is real straightforward. It's, why is it important? That's probably somewhat obvious, but we'll show some things that support it from a data standpoint, why it's important to be data driven. We've already talked about it, and it looks like the polls kind of validate that, is it can be challenging. And we'll talk about why that's challenging. And so Jordan will show some of the technologies that actually help with some of that challenge. And then we're going to present what we call our 6-step game plan. And this is just a framework that you can use as you're either beginning the data-driven journey or as a checkpoint as you continue on it, because you're never done. As we probably all know, there's always additional data sources coming online. And then Jordan's going to go through a customer story. Certainly the theory is great, but we want to show you one of our customers, Brainswell customers, that has really been on this journey for a couple of years, and we can kind of show where they're at and what some of the big results that they've seen. And then obviously Q&A. So I'll start it with one more question. We won't give you a poll to answer on this because I think we'd all answer this question the same way. But would you drive your car if you could only use your rear view mirror? And it's not fair to say you would do it in reverse. We're trying to go forward from that. But I think the answer is probably obvious to all of us that we wouldn't try and drive our car forward using only our rear view mirror. But yet, if you think about it, a lot of businesses are run this way. We make decisions off of spreadsheets that are stale. We're looking at systems that may show us what happened last month, last quarter, maybe this week, and maybe today, but everything seems to be from a rear view standpoint, and you're not really looking forward and prescribing and predicting what's going to happen. And that's really what it means to become data driven, is you don't use the rear view mirror solely. It certainly provides good information, but you try and go beyond that. Now, it's challenging, and I'm sure we've all seen this, is there's never a lack of data these days. The volume of data is large, it's expanding. I think they say 90% of the world's data was created this year. And so if you think about that, that means data is just exploding. It's everywhere. Our devices, our phones, our tablets, our car, everything is now producing data elements or signals that can be measured. But one, it's large and expanding. And probably the bigger challenge is it's scattered. And we'll show some examples of this where it gets siloed across various departments. And so while the data is there, it's really not pulled together. And some of you may have tried to go down a traditional integration project to do that, where you try and sync all this data between all the systems. And that has 2 big issues. One, it's slow, but it's always, again, that rear view mirror. If your integration runs every hour, it's an hour old by the time you get it. And it's very error prone, and it is hard to recover if you try and do integration. So we'll show some new novel approaches that are kind of a new way of integrating. So it's hard. Businesses are struggling. I think this is what everybody pretty much confirmed today. 3/4 of the companies out there right now say they spend a lot of time manually finding, cleaning, and organizing their data. 3/4 of the time, think about that, is spent on data prep, not on decision making, not on insights, just getting things wrangled and pulled together. And 70% of a typical organization's data goes unused for analytic and reporting because it takes so long and it is so hard. So it's not, we're all amongst friends here. We're all having this kind of data struggle. So how do we go about it? And should we? But a lot of times the question is something's really difficult is, well, if it's so hard and it's challenging, should I really be concerned about doing it? Well, McKinsey did a study, this was just a little over a year ago, and what they found is that data-driven organizations are 23 times more likely to acquire a customer because they're making an informed sales conversation. They're 6 times more likely to retain those customers. And the stat that I find amazing is they're 19 times as likely to be profitable as a result of that. So that's that, not just using the rearview mirror, that's making all your decisions as a business around this idea of acquiring, retaining, and profitably growing your business. And I'm sure we all would say those are the things that we want to do. So it is worth it, not easy. So how do we go about it? And what does it look like? And how do we define ourselves if we are a data-driven company? We think there's really 5 attributes of a data-driven company. one, they start to treat data as really an asset, and it becomes an asset that becomes really important for the whole organization to focus on. And you're really trying to get real-time or near real-time insights from that data from all of the systems that touch your organization. And you have to have a culture of making insights available for decision making at every level within the organization. And that's one of the big challenges in this is how do you, first of all, train the team to be able to make these types of informed decisions, and how do you make this data readily available to them? And all critical function areas of the organization need to be involved. It isn't just sales, isn't just marketing, isn't just service or finance. It's all functional areas working together, again, because that data is so siloed and spread that we're all kind of sharing that information. And Jordan's going to show you a great customer story of how they pulled those functions together. The other big challenge is those insights have to be surfaced at the right time in a single place to enable those better decisions. I'm sure we've all done it. We've wrangled the software, we've wrangled the spreadsheets, we pulled it together, we took a week to put it together. We take a look at it and it doesn't answer the question that I need. And so then you start the process all over again. So you really have to get disciplined about the way you pull it together. And what's really interesting when you become data-driven is your decisions are new data that feed back into this feedback loop so that you can learn from what worked and what didn't, and that really provides you those future insights. So those are the attributes of a data-driven company, but how do you get there? How do I accomplish this goal of becoming data-driven? So this is the 6 steps, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this, and then we'll go through in more detail kind of the way this works, and Jordan's going to show you some examples of each of these steps through a customer story. The first one's probably obvious, but it's also one that sometimes the time isn't taken to really dig into the detail of understanding the business need. And a lot of times you'll hear the term KPIs, which are key performance indicators. This is where you really sit down and in our mind, you think about what are the questions that I'm trying to answer? Where do I need information that I don't have today to address my specific business need? As an example, am I accurately forecasting such that my production facility knows what products to make and when? And so that would be one of the business needs. And then you would start to talk about where does that come from? But you want to think about things not just from, again, from a sales standpoint, but from a profit, from a cost, from an efficiency, from a customer satisfaction. And it's okay at this stage to know that you don't have the answers to all those questions, but these are the questions that you know you need to properly inform and make decisions across the business. The second one, candidly, is the one we all want to skip, which is how do you get your people, your process, and technology aligned? I'm a technologist, Jordan is a technologist. We all want that easy button where we just push it and the technology magically does this. I'm here to tell you today it doesn't. It's really good at visualizing that, but you do have to look at, are my people ready? Do they understand what it means to make a decision? Do they understand basic statistics? A lot of this is predictive. We always joke a lot that these things are no longer algebra when you're trying to do this. It does get into a little bit of, more complex type scientific analysis. So it's teaching your team, and there is some change management aspect associated with that. And surprisingly, not all functional areas in an organization get along. And so you've got to address that, and you've got to stop kind of the fiefdom of data that sometimes occur. And then the part, and we'll show an example of this, is then you want to map out those key processes that you're trying to put metrics on top of. And this is probably the hardest part of this whole chain, is laying down and thinking about, as an example, your customer life cycle, all the way from lead to when cash is realized, all the departments that it crosses, all the technology that's touched, and really make sure you have a good understanding of that flow within the business and where you want to measure things so that you can make decisions, especially if you're looking for profit, cost, or efficiency improvements. You really have to understand those flows so you can understand where to make improvements. And then the fun part, then technology starts to make sense and you can apply it and really start to lever up some of that good work that you've done in the first 2 steps. The third one, we always have a surprise with this, is what we recommend, and we do an exercise with our customers, is know where your data lives. So we'll sit down, let's say, for example, we want to understand how long it takes a customer to go from initial interest on our website all the way to the first payment on that first invoice. And look at where all that data lives. And don't forget Excel spreadsheets, don't forget emails, and all the things that we do to move a customer through that type of process. It'll probably amaze you all the different places that you store and keep data right now that may or may not be connected. And that leads to the next step, which is connect, relate, and blend your data. So it's one thing to figure out where it is and how to get it, but then you've got to actually organize it in a way that you start to get that, holistic view, and you understand, what something is as it's moving through those different data sources. As an example is, do I have the same customer identifier in all these systems, so that when I see that company that started out as just an IP address that hit my website to all the way where I'm now invoicing them out of my ERP system, do I know that that is the same customer as it moves through all those same systems? And can I backtrack it once I do get to that cash component of the lead to cash, so I can tell how long it took? The good news there is some of the new technology that Jordan's going to talk about really helps with this in terms of looping and blending that data together. So we'll show some good examples of that. And then the second fun part. So I've got all this put together, and now I can get insights. I can make business decisions. I am looking out the front window. I've got all my sensors going on, so I can really understand what's happening from that data that I blended. And you can even now, with some of the things like artificial intelligence, start to predict some of those future outcomes and start to prescribe what some of those actions could be. And I would suggest we probably all have experienced things over the last couple of months where there were some things that didn't get predicted. Obviously, none of us could predict a pandemic very well, but now as you start to make those decisions and the data comes back in, you do have that near real time, so you can react to the conditions that are going on in the world and the abnormal events that throw all of us for a loop. And then the final piece is taking effective action. So now I've got the insights. It's one thing to understand what's going on, and now you want to take action, really back into those source systems, take some activity or do some things that then start to take advantage of that insights that you've gained. So that's our 6-step game plan, and really the way we think you should approach becoming data-driven, and really a framework for that. And one of the ways to gauge yourself in terms of, am I getting there? Am I becoming more mature on my data-driven journey? Is data-driven companies can start to answer questions like this. So, are my teams consistently meeting the deadlines that matter? How accurate is my forecast? Are my people doing the right thing at the right time to meet my customers' needs? Does my sales pipeline, this is probably the big one we're seeing right now, do I have enough sales pipeline to actually hit my goals, given what's happened in the world right now? And some customers are doing very well, some are not, and some are paused. And so do I have enough there as this mix has changed to actually react to that? The one that we find really interesting, we've done this with a couple of customers recently, is sometimes the assumption is made that your largest customers are your most profitable. Well, they may not be. And so have you done the analysis to understand that? And you may find that your mid-sized customers are more profitable, because if you're selling software, they don't have their own IT firm, things like that. And if they're not, who is and why? Bottom one that's near and dear, I think, to all of us is what payments are most at risk right now on our current open invoices. The one on the right is kind of interesting. Is my customer onboarding process working with a customer right now? We're really digging into their onboarding process to see if we can improve it, not just for efficiency, but actually to improve their customer satisfaction through a better onboarding experience. ROI on marketing. I know Sarah probably gets asked this weekly, right? Sarah, what's my ROI? Did I get the leads I wanted? So it's effective measuring that. And then finally, this is one that's really interesting, is your market feedback will at times tell you what products to introduce if you're able to listen to what those requests are. And this comes through the concept, and George's going to show this, of a loss review. So as I lose, let's make sure we understand, and it can't be just that it was price, or we just were late to the opportunity, but really detail why maybe the product didn't fit right, or we didn't have a feature that we needed, and that will start to inform some of that. So these are the questions that a data-driven company can confidently answer. And I'll challenge everybody to come up with your list and begin the journey to start to answer these types of questions. So I'm going to hand over to Jordan, and he's going to go through a customer story. Oh, and by the way, we get asked a lot, probably the same last name. I try and tell folks that we're brothers, but since we're on videos, I think you can tell now that I am not Jordan's brother. I am his older uncle. No, I'm actually his father. So I'm going to let Jordan actually move forward on the customer story, and then we'll open up for Q&A at the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so as he mentioned, just walk through a customer story. Today we're going to highlight a mid-market marketing services company. And really their focus as a company is on creating digital and print assets for their clients. And in this case, they're just some backdrop on who they are. They're about a 100-employee company, about a $50 million top line. And what's really unique about their business is that they will sometimes sell deals that don't start for several months. So they may be working with clients, they may sign contracts, but they may not actually start the work for several many months down the road. They don't invoice until the work is fulfilled. So sometimes the sale and the actual revenue recognition will be, months or years apart. And they also sometimes struggle to understand their full life cycle. So as I moved from my CRM system to my ERP system, they were struggling to track what Tony mentioned earlier. Are we tracking the same customers with the same IDs? They may have similar names, and they were struggling to understand the holistic view of their lead to cash cycle. Let's see, make sure I can go to the next slide.
You want to go forward?
If you want to click through.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, perfect. And so when they started their data-driven journey, they were pretty new. They were definitely a gut-driven organization. They had a pretty charismatic leader that really drove the ship forward. But they realized that what they needed to get from where they were today to where they needed to go in the future, they needed to rely on data. They needed to have some insights into where they were going. So a couple of the key challenges they were facing at the time was all around their lead to cash cycle. And just to give a little backdrop on that, it's essentially trying to understand the full customer journey. So someone that comes to my website early on may not know very much information about them. They come in, we have a conversation with them in the sales process. We may do some sort of project work with them, and then finally we may invoice them and actually recognize some cash at the end of the cycle. And so what they were struggling to figure out was, what does my sales pipeline look like? Do I have enough revenue to hit my goals? Where are the bottlenecks in this cycle? Where are things dropping off? Where are we struggling to understand why what our CRM pipeline number says and our ERP number says are widely different? How accurate is my forecast? With this variable revenue recognition, how do I know how I'm going to do this month, this quarter, this year? And are my team spending time with the right people in the right places? Are they focused on the things that are truly going to help grow the business, or are they just spinning their wheels and unable to help grow? And so their goals were really a couple of things. So they wanted to create more accurate forecasting. They wanted to be able to see not only the pipeline grow, but also is it the right shape so that we know that we're going to hit our numbers. They wanted to focus on not only sales efficiency, but sales effectiveness. So helping people understand how can we truly target the right customers so that we can make the most revenue. They wanted to focus on sales velocity, which is how can they move things through the pipe quickly, and overall just some customer lifecycle improvements so that they could increase customer satisfaction and stickiness. So this is really the second step that Tony mentioned earlier. And as you can tell, he mentioned it's a complex process. This is a bit of a complex diagram, so we won't dig into this too deeply. But essentially, this was the process they went through to figure out their entire lead to cash cycle. So everything from a target on the very far left to a true customer on the far right. They went through and identified the various steps and stages that their sales team and product team would walk through. And so they realized that at each step of this, they were losing insights. They weren't understanding why things were getting stalled, why they weren't moving through the process. And especially on the revenue recognition side, they were struggling to understand why the goal that they had set early on wasn't being met with the actual revenue that they produced for any given quarter. So once they identified their process, they understood, okay, this is what we want to improve. This is how we want to move forward. They needed to understand where their data lives. And like most mid-market companies, they had a best of breed approach, which means they didn't buy into any particular technology stack. They picked different tools off the shelf based on their needs. So for their marketing system, they use MailChimp for email blasts. They use Sugar for their CRM tracking. They use a tool called Vendavo for their quoting. QuickBooks at the time was their quote unquote ERP system that they used to track invoices. And they had several other tools that were less understood at the time. So they had a lot of their goals tracked in spreadsheets. They had a SQL Server custom .NET app that they were tracking their projects. And they even had some unstructured data like marketing content that they were stored in S3. And they wanted to understand the full life cycle of how did all this data play into what we're trying to accomplish. And so when they got to this point, this is normally the technology decision step. So what technologies are we going to look at as we try to connect, relate, and blend this data? And at the time, because they were mid-market, there were kind of several options. They could go the true data warehouse route, so they could look at investing in a full-blown data warehouse, potentially in the cloud, potentially on-premise. But they realized that was going to be, a 6 to 12-month journey. It was going to cost, quite a large budget to accomplish. And so they started looking at other options. A secondary option was going something more like a data lake with some data virtualization. And while that was quicker, it still wasn't going to get them where they needed to be in the timeline that they needed. And so they ended up going with a cloud data platform, which let them really quickly connect and relate the data that they needed. So once they had the data identified, they had it connected with technology, this is where they started to really gain some unique insights. So they were able to connect, for instance, their opportunities in Sugar with invoices in QuickBooks. So one opportunity may be related to many invoices. So they could start to gain insights like how many opportunities have invoices with open balances. So they could go to the salesperson and say, hey, can you reach out to your customer and find out why these invoices have balances? Can we help them pay them? Can we help them what they need to do as a customer to re-engage with us? They could also start to get some ROI for their marketing. So they could figure out for any particular marketing campaign, how much revenue did we truly produce? For a lot of organizations, that's really hard to track is how do I go from a single campaign to a sales engagement all the way to real revenue? And they were able to get down to close to the dollar on each campaign of how much revenue they produced. And this is really the fun part. This is where everybody gets excited. This is once all the hard work has been done, the infrastructure is in place, and you can really start to gain some insights from your data. And so for them, we used Power BI to create a dashboard. And basically in this dashboard, you can see many KPIs, some different graphics, but this is connecting all that data we just talked about. So everything from the MailChimp data, the QuickBooks data, the Sugar CRM data, and all in near real time. So they're able to access data as of about 10 minutes prior. And what's nice is because they layered the data, they took the right approach, they could drill into any given chart to see the underlying line items. I'll click through.
Sure.
Perfect. So this is just basically a click through. So if they clicked on the invoices, they could drill in, they could see real time the invoices out of QuickBooks. They could see the paid, unpaid. So really get some unique insights that they prior had really no idea what was going on. And you can see here the green indicates paid, the kind of reddish brown is unpaid. And so at different times in their cycle, they could start to see some seasonality, some gaps. They could start to gain some insights that they really didn't have prior. And really to round this out, they need to be able to take action. So in that chart that we just saw, those unpaid invoices, they wanted to remind their customers that, hey, even in times of uncertainty, please pay us if you can. How can we communicate with them? And so out of the dashboard, they were able to really quickly, click a button, send a reminder through QuickBooks. They didn't have to go log into a separate system. They didn't have to export the chart, re-import it. They could really quickly take effective action right from within the dashboard. And really, the goal of all this was to become data-driven. And they went from using the rearview mirror, looking behind them, and using historical data to make decisions, to now they're looking out the front view mirror, and they're looking at it as if it's a self-driving car that helps them understand where are the obstacles, where should we speed up, where should we slow down. And so they were able to go from almost no data acumen to now becoming truly data-driven. Cool.
Great. So I think, Sarah, we were going to go through some Q&A at this point, right? So
yeah, okay. Yeah, that was really great. Thank you, Tony and Jordan. So folks on the line, we've had a few questions come in, Jordan, while you were speaking. But if anyone else, if you have questions, just put them right in the question box and we will get to them. Okay, so the first question, do I have to build a data warehouse to become data-driven?
I'll let you answer that one if that's okay, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. And there's a lot of marketing out there right now around data warehousing, cloud data warehousing. While that's one option, especially if you're a truly large enterprise organization, it's not the only option anymore. There are other approaches. You can do things more like cloud data lakes. You can do some hybrid, on-prem in cloud approaches. And there is a whole new category of software coming out called, cloud data platforms, which are much more business friendly, more point and click, that allow you to connect the data and get those near real insights without having to, build a whole development team to implement.
Great. Let's see here. This is an interesting one. How do you get everyone on the team to agree on the right KPIs?
You want me to answer that one, Jordan? So,
sure, yeah, I can tackle it.
We'll probably both answer this one, but it's a little bit of herding cats, to be honest. Everybody has kind of what they want, right? So marketing has certain KPIs they want, sales has certain ones. You can get into KPI overload where you have so many numbers for the organization that it becomes really difficult to figure out what to do. So that's why we recommend going through that process step, because if you figure out what your key processes are that you're trying to improve or trying to understand better, that does two things. It makes it a cross-functional initiative. So now everybody has to talk about things as they work through the process. And we would argue too, it flips the conversation to the right orientation, I would call it. As an example, customer lifecycle, that lead to cash that Jordan described, you want that focused on the customer and what the key KPIs are that as they move through. Or if you're looking at operations, it's going to be how do I better manage my logistics to reduce costs. So figure out what you want the outcome to be, and then that'll help drive your KPIs. And Jordan, maybe you can talk about the customer story and kind of how we help with that on their key KPIs.
Absolutely. I think with KPIs, a lot of it comes down to understanding the data that makes up that number. So it's one thing if it's just a number on a dashboard and it's maybe good or bad. But if everybody in the organization can then drill down and see, oh, here are the individual items that make up that number, it helps align, what's the definition? Why is this important for our organization? So that would be my recommendation is not just seeing a number, but also being able to drill in and understand the reasoning behind the number.
Yeah, and actually, I'll give a good example. We recently had a request where there was the assumption that more activities led to more sales. We probably all had that kind of idea that, okay, if I just talk to more people and I get out more proposals, I'm going to generate more business. Mm-hmm. And what we found through this analysis, we figured out what those KPIs were. Obviously, activities is one, proposals is another. Then what we wanted to look at is, okay, activities went up, proposals went up, did close rates go up, right? Because that's the KPI that should improve by that. And what was interesting in this study is we found yes, with a caveat. What was interesting there is as we started to look at the data, while activities and proposals led to it, we found some real synergy around the number of proposals. And so what this client learned is around 3 to 4, their close rates went up significantly. And what they learned as they dug under that is those 3 or 4 proposals were variations of kind of a good, better, best approach, and it meant customer was engaged. And so they focused on, well, let's improve the activities around the proposals so they're more complete. And they started issuing proposals that already had the cross-sell opportunities in it. So it had the good, better, best scenarios. And in that case, they were actually trying to reduce the number of activities, but make them more effective. So those are the kind of things you can learn from a KPI and then improve that process.
Great. So Jordan, this is probably for you, this question. What technologies were used by the example company? So you mentioned MailChimp and Sugar for CRM, QuickBooks, Power BI, I think you mentioned was the tool they used for dashboards. Was there any other technologies that were used?
Yeah, they decided to go with kind of a more modern approach, a term that's called data virtualization, which is something that probably don't have time to dig in too much in this call, but essentially lets them connect to the data without moving it. So a lot of times traditionally companies will move the data. They'll create a whole pipeline where they nightly copy the data into their data warehouse. And there's some more modern approaches that let you tackle big data in a more lightweight way. And so they decided to go with a cloud data platform that let them do that. So instead of having to wait for their nightly export, they could at any point in time click a button, refresh, and get the real number. So yeah, in combination with all their internal tools, they end up using several different platforms.
And Sarah, you gave that question to the right person. So as the executive looking at the big benefit that came from I can't explain how it works, but that data virtualization, what I can tell you is my KPIs I'm now able to get almost near real time. And if I don't like the KPI I see, I can hit refresh and Jordan's technology will go grab all that source system and within a few seconds pull the data back. And so that gets this idea of velocity going in the organization. We probably all felt it, right? You go to the dashboard, you see, gosh, those 2 opportunities are not coded right. Those close dates pushed, and you have to go into your CRM, make the change, hit the refresh button, wait 5 minutes, then go into the dashboard, hit the refresh there, and that's that pipeline Jordan was talking about. With this data virtualization, the benefit for me has been I hit refresh, it goes and figures all that out and then pulls it back, within a few seconds, and I'm able to see it. And I can literally change things right there from in the dashboard. I think Jordan showed that example of QuickBooks. That's going back into QuickBooks, which is pretty interesting, and making that change or that update.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I remember when I saw that you showed us a sample of that, Tony, for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, we need this. All right, the questions are coming in now. So we talked a little bit about this, Tony, when we were talking about agreeing on the right KPIs, but do you have a process that would help us build our data metrics?
Yeah, and it's really the 6-step game plan is really the way we would say to approach, and it's those first 2. The first thing, and really focus on what is it you're trying to drive an outcome around. What area of the business? What are the results? Is it for growth? Is it for reducing profit? Really, is it to become more efficient? Combination of all 3. And then what area of the business? And then we can't do it as easily with the whiteboard sessions anymore, but through a virtual session, it's usually getting either an internal facilitator or somebody like us helping you talk through those KPIs and kind of starting to prioritize them. And that's where a facilitator can help. Some things are more important based upon the outcome you're trying to accomplish. Again, if your focus is on we need more leads and lead generation, your KPIs should be more marketing focused than they are sales. Where if we're trying to reduce our payment leakage, that's much more over on the ERP side. Or if it's that full life cycle, you got to get across each of those transition points. So hopefully that answered the question, but if not, so let me know. Great question.
JD says, I hung a whiteboard in our conference room last year for this endeavor, but it's sitting there blank.
Whiteboarding is great. Well, I have to, old school me doesn't like the electronic stuff quite as well, but I'm learning. Still can't read my writing, right, Jordan? On an electronic whiteboard, it's no better than a regular whiteboard. But
that is true.
So another comment / question, my experience is that these projects can take many months and be very expensive, right? We all care about cost. What has been your experience, or what is your experience with this for either of you?
You want to take it first, Jordan, then I'll talk about.
Sure.
Or actually, yeah, I'll answer from a speed standpoint, and then Jordan can, if need be, we can go into kind of how the technology helps. But our philosophy on this is start small. It's really, eating that elephant. And so we see a lot of times the big projects are big because you're trying to do everything. You're trying to pull all your different systems together. And that's why we like this process orientation. So figure out what it is you're trying to improve or understand better and focus in on that and try and set a goal of weeks. These projects, they're working really well. You should be able to get something of value within a 3 to 4 week period, because we should be able to, with the technology, which Jordan can explain, really pull that back together. I think the dashboard he showed you, that was a little over 4 weeks just because of everybody being busy, but it moved quite quickly. And then you build off of that because you're going to learn through that first exercise and you're going to become more and more self-sufficient, excuse me.
Yeah, I would just to add on that, highlight slightly, is that as technologies have moved to the cloud, it has made it much more straightforward to get that velocity and get that speed to get a project up and running. Not having to worry about the infrastructure piece, you can really focus on the business side, the data, the KPIs, and that has helped cut costs and time on these projects.
Great. So I'm down to my last couple of questions. So, and if anyone else has any questions, please put them in the question box. But so they're somewhat related, but let me ask the first one. I get the concept and the value of being data driven, but how do I communicate this importance to my manager?
Great question. So depends upon what area you're in, but I'll approach it from a business standpoint, and then maybe Jordan, you can talk about IT. But from a business standpoint, really, I think there's some really good, if you need some industry articles on this, Forbes is writing about it, McKinsey's writing about it, Forrester's all writing about it, is this whole concept of businesses that are data driven and use instinct simply as another point into a decision, candidly just grow faster, they're more profitable, they just do better. So the stats don't lie. And then I think it's just doing a thought exercise if somebody's really trying to, use your situation where you didn't have data that could have helped make a decision, especially if that decision that was made was instinctual and it wasn't effective. And so you can kind of bring that back to them. And if somebody wants to sidebar on that and kind of brainstorm, we can definitely help with that.
Yeah. And we'll be sending out the recording, so share it with your manager, share it with your leadership team. Okay, final question. How can my company get started on becoming more data-driven? What's kind of that first step?
Yeah, that's a loaded one. Good one, though. It's a really good question. Yeah, I think to start small. Pick an area where you're having some trouble getting data for those key decisions. And then we would suggest go through the 6 steps. What is it you're trying to accomplish? What are the things that you need to do from a people, process, and technology? And then walk through the technology. A lot of times you have that, and don't think you have to go buy a whole bunch of new technologies. As Jordan showed, client we dealt with had Power BI and Excel, right? Jordan, you're doing a lot of stuff with tools they already had. So take advantage of what you've got. Anything else you would add technology-wise, Jordan, to help people get started, or?
Not so much on the technology side, but I know one of the slides coming up is we do offer a data-driven assessment too to help you understand, where are we using our data effectively, where are we not using our data effectively. So definitely, we can help guide you on that. And then from a technology standpoint too, like Tony mentioned, is you've already invested in systems and in data. How can you make the most of them with your data?
Great. All right. Yeah. If you want to actually flip that slide, Tony.
Good lead-in.
Yeah, a great lead-in. So for everyone who is on the line today, we are offering a complimentary 25-minute data-driven assessment with Tony and Jordan. So if you're interested in taking advantage of that, to sign up, you can email us at sales@braincell.net. We'll also include the information and the instructions for scheduling this assessment.
And invite your manager if you want. We'd be happy to.
And invite your manager.
Yeah.
Or anyone from your leadership team. Yep. So thank you again. Thank you, Tony and Jordan. Any final words before we wrap up and give everyone 15 minutes back in their day?
I'll say something, Jordan. You can we're as you're probably sensing, Jordan and I, we live for this. We're Sarah knows we're data geeks, data wranglers. So please reach out, email us if we can help in any way. We really think this is what's going to differentiate companies over the next decade. A lot of people are saying that data is the new oil, and we just want to help you mine that oil. So that's really what our personal goals are. And Jordan will figure out a way to make the tech work, I promise you. So Jordan, I'll talk about that. But.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, we like to say, use data as a strategic advantage. So we're here to help.
Awesome. Thank you both. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. You will receive the recording and these slides in your inbox tomorrow morning. Have a great rest of the week. Bye, everyone.
Excellent.